Please, she whispered, her voice raw, barely more than a thread. I haven't eaten in days. Just some food.
The storm pressed against the city like a living thing, its fury shaking the skyscrapers that clawed at the heavens. From the 42nd floor of Hale Tower, Jonathan Hale sat in silence, his office lights dimmed to a warm but lifeless glow. Rain streaked down the vast panes of glass that framed the Chicago skyline, the city beyond blurred into a smear of neon and shadow. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his eyes unfocused, a half-empty glass of scotch sweating on the desk beside him. The drink was habit, not comfort. He no longer remembered when it had last given him warmth, now it simply dulled the edges of everything, turning the days into shapeless hours that bled together. 2 years had passed since Claire's death, but grief refused to soften. If anything, it had grown sharper, carving him hollow, leaving behind a shell of a man. The silence of his office gnawed at him, thick and endless, broken only by the distant hum of the storm. He had once thrived here, building empires from the ground up, commanding boardrooms with precision and fire. Now, the empire remained but the fire was gone. He stayed only because staying was easier than going home. Lightning flashed, splitting the horizon, and in the sudden blaze of white, Jonathan almost saw her reflection in the glass, her figure standing beside him, her hand reaching for his. The illusion vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him clutching at the scotch. That was when he heard the knock. At first, he ignored it. A trick of the storm, he thought, a shutter rattling, some forgotten door unlatched. But then it came again, sharper this time, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Jonathan frowned. Nobody came here after hours. His assistants knew better than to disturb him, and he had long since withdrawn from what little circle of friends he once had. Whoever it was, they were either lost or reckless. He rose, his joints stiff from hours of stillness, and crossed the office. Another knock came, urgent now, almost trembling. He hesitated a beat, then turned the handle. The sight that met him was so strange, so jarring, that for a moment he thought grief was playing its cruel tricks again. A girl stood in the doorway, drenched from the storm. Her hair clung to her cheeks, dark strands plastered to her pale skin. Water dripped from her sleeves, pooling at her feet on the marble floor. She looked no older than 12 or 13, her thin frame swallowed by clothes that were too big for her. But it was her eyes that rooted him to the spot, brilliant green, startling in their clarity, and piercing in a way that seemed to strip him bare. Please, she whispered, her voice raw, barely more than a thread. I haven't eaten in days. Just some food. Jonathan's hand tightened on the doorframe. This wasn't possible. This wasn't right. The girl shivered under his gaze, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she expected rejection. She should have been a stranger. And yet, something deep within him twisted violently at the sight of her. He opened his mouth, intending to say no, to tell her she had the wrong floor, to call security. But the words lodged in his throat. Instead, against reason, against instinct, he stepped aside. The girl blinked, as if she hadn't expected him to move. Slowly, cautiously, she crossed the threshold. The storm howled behind her as Jonathan shut the door, sealing them in the dim glow of his office. For a long moment, neither spoke. She stood dripping on the polished floor, her gaze darting nervously around the room, while Jonathan tried to steady the pounding in his chest. What's your name? He asked finally, his voice rough from disuse. Eliana, she said, so soft he almost missed it. The name hit him like a blow. His breath caught, his chest constricting. Eliana. He remembered Claire's voice, faint now in memory but achingly clear in that instant. If we ever have a daughter, Jonathan, I want to name her Eliana. It means God has answered. His throat tightened. Coincidence, surely. It had to be coincidence. Where are your parents? He asked carefully. Her eyes fell to the floor. Silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, before she whispered, I don't have any. Jonathan's stomach sank. He should have pressed her, demanded answers. Instead, he found himself moving toward the small kitchenette at the edge of his office. The cupboards were mostly barren, stocked with nothing but instant noodles and stale crackers for late nights. He filled a pot with water and set it to boil. His hands trembled faintly as he moved, a subtle betrayal he hoped she wouldn't notice. Eliana watched him, her eyes wide, her body still trembling with cold. When he finally placed a steaming bowl of noodles in front of her, she hesitated only a second before eating. She ate quickly, but with care, as though afraid to draw too much attention. Jonathan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her. He shouldn't have let her in. He shouldn't have fed her. But with every bite she took, the silence inside him shifted, just slightly, as though something long buried stirred. When she finally looked up, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Crooked, hesitant, but warm. Jonathan froze. It was Claire's smile. Jonathan turned away quickly, his hand gripping the counter until his knuckles blanched. It wasn't possible. His mind was playing tricks on him, dredging up fragments of memory and pasting them onto the face of a girl who had wandered in from the storm. That was all. And yet, when he forced himself to glance back, the resemblance still rattled him. The tilt of her mouth, the tentative kindness in her expression, it was like staring through time. He cleared his throat, his voice steadying with effort. Eat slowly. You'll make yourself sick if you rush. Eliana nodded, obedient, though her hand still trembled as she lifted the spoon again. She was ravenous, he could see it, but she forced herself to pace the bites, her small frame stiff with restraint. When the bowl was empty, she set the spoon down with quiet care, as though afraid she might be accused of greed. Her gaze flicked toward him, uncertain, wary, but there was something else beneath it, expectation, almost as if she thought he might send her back into the storm at any moment. Jonathan felt the weight of her eyes on him. He looked away, crossing to the window where rain lashed against the glass. The city below glowed faintly through the haze, streets slick with water, headlights blurring into white streaks. He had never thought of Chicago as cruel, but tonight it seemed merciless. "What were you doing out there?" he asked, still staring at the storm. She hesitated before answering. "I didn't know where else to go." Her voice was so soft he almost missed it beneath the thunder. "You live on the streets?" A pause. Then, sometimes. The words dug into him like splinters. He clenched his jaw, swallowing down the urge to ask 100 more questions. She wasn't his responsibility. She was just a child who had knocked on the wrong door. Tomorrow he would call the authorities, arrange for her to be taken somewhere safe, somewhere with food and warmth. That was all this was. But then her voice broke through again, shattering that fragile logic. "Do you still play the piano?" Jonathan stiffened. Slowly, he turned toward her. She sat small and fragile at the edge of his desk chair, her legs drawn close, her eyes wide and unblinking as they searched his. "What did you just say?" His voice came out low, dangerous even to his own ears. Eliana tilted her head, strands of wet hair falling across her face. "The piano," she said quietly. "I used to hear it. At night. You'd play when you couldn't sleep." A chill crawled up Jonathan's spine. His heart pounded so hard he felt it echo in his ears. The piano stood across the room, shrouded in dust. No one had touched it since Claire died. He hadn't spoken of it. Not to his colleagues, not to friends, not even to the rare visitor who stepped foot in his office. It was a piece of him he had locked away with his grief. "How could you know that?" he demanded, stepping toward her. Eliana didn't flinch. Instead, her gaze softened, as if she pitied him. "Because I remember," she said. Jonathan's breath faltered. She rose slowly, her soaked shoes squeaking faintly against the floor, and crossed toward the piano. She trailed her small fingers across the wood, leaving streaks in the dust, then glanced back at him as if asking permission. Jonathan stood frozen. Every instinct screamed to stop her, to shut the lid, to push her out the door and lock it behind her. And yet, he couldn't move. Eliana slid onto the bench, her legs barely reaching the pedals. She placed her hands on the keys, hesitant at first, and then pressed. The notes rang out, faintly sour from disuse, but unmistakable. A melody formed, slow, careful, almost broken. Jonathan staggered back a step, his chest constricting. It wasn't random. It wasn't the fumbling of a child who had never touched the instrument before. It was a song. Claire's song. The lullaby she used to hum under her breath when she thought no one was listening. A song she claimed had no name, something her grandmother had sung to her when she was little. And Eliana played it as though she had known it all her life. Jonathan's legs nearly gave out. He gripped the edge of the desk, his breathing uneven, his mind racing. How do you know that? His voice cracked under the weight of the question. Eliana turned toward him, her green eyes luminous in the dim light. Because it's yours, she whispered. It's always been yours. The words hollowed him out, cutting deeper than any blade. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. This girl, this stranger, carried pieces of Claire with her that no one else could have known. And Jonathan, for the first time in years, felt something he couldn't name, terror, hope, and a grief that clawed its way back to the surface, all at once. Jonathan could hardly breathe. The storm outside battered the windows, but the real storm was inside him now, tearing through everything he thought he knew. Eliana's fingers lingered on the keys, hesitant but sure. She wasn't guessing. She knew. Each note of that lullaby sank into him like a ghost's whisper, unraveling the fragile control he had built over the years. When the last note faded, she looked up at him with an expression too old for her face. A mixture of sadness and understanding, as though she knew what she had just done to him. Jonathan's voice was hoarse when he finally managed words. Who taught you that? Her small shoulders lifted in a shrug. No one. I just remembered. He shook his head violently, as though trying to break free from some invisible snare. This wasn't possible. He had never recorded that song, never played it for anyone but Claire. It had belonged to her, and to him, alone. Don't lie to me. The demand came out sharper than he intended. Eliana didn't flinch. She tilted her head, studying him the way a child studies a puzzle they're determined to solve. I'm not lying. Jonathan pressed his palms against his temples, pacing the floor. His rational mind clawed for explanations. Perhaps she had overheard, someone else must have known the melody, passed it along. Or maybe he was unraveling, grief warping reality until everything bent toward Claire's memory. He had seen her face in crowds before, heard her laugh in strangers' voices. Maybe this was the same. But when he looked at Eliana again, logic faltered. Her hair had begun to dry, curling slightly around her face. Her cheeks, flushed from warmth, carried that same faint dimple Claire once had. And her eyes, those green eyes, cut through every argument he tried to build. He forced himself to speak steadily. Where did you come from, Eliana? How did you get past the building's security? I just walked, she said simply, as if that explained everything. No one stopped me. That's not possible. His tone was harsher than intended, but the unease in his chest demanded an answer. She hugged her knees against her chest, looking suddenly smaller. Sometimes people don't notice me, she whispered. Like I'm not really there. Jonathan stared at her, unsettled. There was no guile in her words, no cunning deception. Just a quiet honesty that gnawed at him. He should have picked up the phone, called the police, handed her over to professionals who knew what to do with children like her. That would have been the sensible choice. But when he imagined her being taken away, pulled out into the storm again, or worse, lost in some faceless system, the thought twisted something deep inside him. And for the first time in years, Jonathan realized he was afraid. Afraid of what she was, of what she meant, of what she might uncover. He moved back to his desk, dropping into the chair heavily. Eliana remained by the piano, her small hands folded in her lap, waiting as though she had all the time in the world. You can't stay here, he said finally, forcing firmness into his tone. This isn't a place for you. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed almost unsurprised. I know. The simplicity of her reply unnerved him more than any protest might have. "I'll call someone in the morning," Jonathan continued. "Someone who can help you." She nodded once, quietly. But her eyes never left his, and in them he saw something that made his chest ache. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to recognition. He broke the gaze first, turning back to the window where rain still streaked in silver sheets. Minutes passed in silence, the storm the only sound between them. But the silence was no longer empty. It pressed against him, thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of Claire's absence and this girl's inexplicable presence. Finally, exhaustion dragged at him. He rose, pulled a blanket from the cabinet, and handed it to her. "You can sleep on the couch tonight. Just until morning." Eliana accepted the blanket with both hands, her expression unreadable. She curled onto the leather couch, small and fragile beneath the heavy folds. Within minutes, her breathing slowed, steady and soft against the storm's fury. Jonathan stood over her for a long time, studying the strange, delicate curve of her features. He told himself it was the dim light, the shadows, the tricks of a tired mind. That was all. And yet, as he turned away, he swore he heard Claire's voice whisper through the storm, the echo of words she had spoken years ago. "If we ever have a daughter, Jonathan, I'd want to name her Eliana." He gripped the edge of the desk, staring at the piano across the room. No, he told himself firmly. Tomorrow, he would call someone. Tomorrow, she would be gone. But deep down, buried beneath layers of denial and reason, he already knew he wouldn't. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Morning bled into the city in muted shades of gray. The storm had passed, leaving the streets below slick with rain, reflecting the first timid rays of light. From the 42nd floor, Chicago looked washed clean, though Jonathan knew better. Storms didn't erase, they only revealed what the water could not carry away. He hadn't slept. Not really. He had drifted in and out of shallow dozes, his mind gnawed raw by questions that refused to quiet. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the girl curled up on his couch, the way her small body seemed swallowed by the blanket, her features too close to memory to be coincidence. When he finally rose, the office was still. For a moment, he thought she might have vanished, a figment of grief conjured by whiskey and thunder. But then he saw her, still there, still real. Eliana sat cross-legged on the couch, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was awake, though she hadn't moved much. Her green eyes followed him quietly, as if waiting for his permission to breathe. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Morning." Her lips twitched faintly, the shadow of a smile. "Morning." He rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the rasp of stubble. It was a strange thing, hearing her voice in this place. For years, his mornings had been filled only with silence. Even his employees spoke in hushed tones around him, as though sound itself had become offensive. Now, here she was, this slip of a girl who had appeared out of nowhere, shattering the rhythm of his solitude. He moved to the kitchenette, reaching for the coffee machine. His hand hovered, then pulled back. She couldn't drink coffee. Too young. He sighed and searched the cupboards instead, coming up with the same paltry supplies, noodles, crackers, a tin of soup. Not much else. "You hungry?" She nodded. He set water to boil again, the motions mechanical, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't keep her here. He shouldn't keep her here. And yet the thought of calling anyone, of letting strangers take her, lodged like a stone in his throat. When he placed the steaming bowl before her, she accepted it with quiet gratitude. She ate more slowly this time, as though she didn't want to test his patience. Jonathan leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her. "You need to tell me the truth," he said finally. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Where did you come from, Eliana? Why this building? Why my door?" She set the spoon down carefully, her small hands folding in her lap. "I don't know," she said after a pause. "I just ended up here." "That's not an answer." His tone was sharper than intended, and she flinched. He exhaled, forcing himself to soften. I need to understand. You walk into a secured tower in the middle of the night, come all the way to the top floor, and knock on my door. Out of thousands in this city. You expect me to believe that was chance? Her gaze lifted to meet his, steady despite the tremor in her voice. I didn't think about it. My feet just brought me here. Like I was supposed to. Jonathan stared at her, unsettled. He wanted to scoff, to dismiss it as childish nonsense. But something in her eyes, the certainty, the quiet weight behind her words, silenced him. Silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the city waking below. Finally, Jonathan straightened, tugging his jacket from the chair. I have work. You can stay here until I'm back. But don't touch anything. Don't open the door. Understand? She nodded obediently. Yet as he moved toward the elevator, a part of him hesitated. Leaving her alone felt wrong, though he couldn't say why. He glanced back once. She sat small and still on the couch, watching him with those unblinking green eyes. For a brief, irrational moment, he imagined Claire sitting there instead, her hands folded in her lap the same way, her smile waiting for him to return. The resemblance twisted his gut. He turned sharply and left. The day passed in a blur of meetings and signatures. Jonathan moved through the motions like an automaton, his mind only half tethered to the world around him. Colleagues noticed his distraction, but no one dared comment. Hale's temper was a thing of legend, and since Claire's death, he had been colder than ever. But today was different. Today his thoughts weren't only on what he'd lost. They were on what waited 42 floors above the city, curled on his office couch. By late afternoon, he could no longer concentrate. Against every rule he had built for himself, he cut the day short and returned. When the elevator doors opened, he braced himself for the possibility she might be gone. That would be easiest. A closed chapter before it had a chance to begin. But she wasn't gone. She sat at the piano. His breath caught. The lid was open, the dust wiped clean in broad strokes by her small hands. Her fingers pressed the keys hesitantly, coaxing out a melody that hummed fragile in the air. Not the lullaby this time. Something else. Something Claire used to play when she thought he wasn't listening, an unfinished piece she had worked on for years, never satisfied with it. Eliana played the first few bars, faltered, then tried again, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Jonathan stood rooted to the spot, his chest tight, the storm of the night before still raging inside him. How could she know this? Jonathan's shoes were still wet from the rain-slick streets, but he didn't notice. His entire focus was on the child at his piano, coaxing ghosts from ivory keys. Stop. His voice cracked like a whip. Eliana's fingers froze mid-note. She twisted on the bench, wide-eyed, her hands withdrawing to her lap as if she'd been caught stealing. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. How do you know that song? His voice was low now, dangerous. She shook her head quickly. I don't. Not really. It was in my head. Like a memory. The notes, they felt familiar. Jonathan's jaw clenched. He stepped closer, his presence looming over her small frame. Don't lie to me. That melody, it isn't published anywhere. It isn't played. Claire wrote it. Claire, my wife. His chest tightened around her name. The only person who ever touched that piano was her. Eliana's lips trembled. I didn't mean to make you angry. Anger wasn't the right word. Terror was closer. A terror threaded with longing, with a dangerous hope he couldn't afford. He dragged a hand down his face, forcing his voice steady. Sit. She sat, her legs swinging nervously above the polished floor. Tell me everything, Jonathan said. When you first heard that melody. Who played it? Every detail you remember. She frowned in concentration, her small hands knotting in her lap. It's not clear. Like pieces of a dream. I hear it sometimes when I close my eyes. Not all of it, just the beginning. Jonathan's heart hammered. Did someone teach it to you? A music teacher, a foster parent, someone? She shook her head. No. I don't know anyone who plays piano. The room seemed to shrink around him. The rational part of his mind screamed for explanation, coincidence, imagination, some subconscious borrowing. Children were sponges, perhaps she had overheard it somewhere, though he knew that was impossible. That piece had never left this room. Claire had guarded it jealously, promising to finish it one day, to play it for him when it was perfect. She had died before that day came. And now here was Eliana, stumbling through the notes like a memory she shouldn't possess. Jonathan turned sharply, pacing the room, his thoughts jagged. She watched him silently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice fragile. You miss her. The word stopped him cold. He looked at her, startled. You miss your wife, Eliana said, as if the truth were obvious. That's why you don't go home. That's why this place feels like a cage. She hesitated, as though searching for the right word. Like you're trapped here with the pieces of her. Jonathan's throat tightened painfully. What do you know about my wife? He demanded, harsher than he intended. Her shoulders hunched. Nothing. I just feel it. He stared at her, breathing unevenly. Every instinct screamed at him to put distance between them, to push her out before this strangeness consumed him. And yet, he couldn't. He crossed the room in 2 strides, sinking into the chair opposite her. Eliana. Look at me. She raised her gaze, green eyes luminous in the dim light. Who are you? His voice was almost a plea. Really? Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, softly, I don't know. The words rang with truth, and somehow that frightened him even more. That night, Jonathan didn't send her away. He couldn't bring himself to. He prepared the small guest room adjacent to his office, and used, dust-covered, and tucked her in with sheets that still smelled faintly of storage. She lay small and still beneath the blankets, her hair fanned across the pillow. For a moment, with the light spilling across her face, she looked so much like Claire that Jonathan's chest ached with the force of it. Good night, she whispered, eyes already heavy with sleep. Jonathan lingered at the doorway, unable to move. Good night. When he finally returned to his office, he poured a drink but didn't touch it. He sat in the dark, the silence pressing in, his mind haunted by the ghost of unfinished music. How could a child he'd never met know Claire's melody? How could she look at him with eyes that mirrored the woman he'd lost? The city pulsed below, indifferent to his torment. Jonathan Hale, the man who controlled skyscrapers and fortunes, sat powerless before a mystery wrapped in a girl's fragile frame. For the first time in years, he felt something stir beyond grief. Not hope, not yet. But the whisper of possibility. Jonathan turned sharply, pacing the room, his thoughts jagged. She watched him silently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice fragile. You miss her. The word stopped him cold. He looked at her, startled. You miss your wife, Eliana said, as if the truth were obvious. That's why you don't go home. That's why this place feels like a cage. She hesitated, as though searching for the right word. Like you're trapped here with the pieces of her. Jonathan's throat tightened painfully. What do you know about my wife? He demanded, harsher than he intended. Her shoulders hunched. Nothing. I just feel it. He stared at her, breathing unevenly. Every instinct screamed at him to put distance between them, to push her out before this strangeness consumed him. And yet, he couldn't. He crossed the room in 2 strides, sinking into the chair opposite her. Eliana. Look at me. She raised her gaze, green eyes luminous in the dim light. Who are you? His voice was almost a plea. Really? Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, softly, I don't know. The words rang with truth, and somehow that frightened him even more. That night, Jonathan didn't send her away. He couldn't bring himself to. He prepared the small guest room adjacent to his office, and used, dust-covered, and tucked her in with sheets that still smelled faintly of storage. She lay small and still beneath the blankets, her hair fanned across the pillow. For a moment, with the light spilling across her face, she looked so much like Claire that Jonathan's chest ached with the force of it. "Good night," she whispered, eyes already heavy with sleep. Jonathan lingered at the doorway, unable to move. "Good night." When he finally returned to his office, he poured a drink but didn't touch it. He sat in the dark, the silence pressing in, his mind haunted by the ghost of unfinished music. How could a child he'd never met know Claire's melody? How could she look at him with eyes that mirrored the woman he'd lost? The city pulsed below, indifferent to his torment. Jonathan Hale, the man who controlled skyscrapers and fortunes, sat powerless before a mystery wrapped in a girl's fragile frame. For the first time in years, he felt something stir beyond grief. Not hope, not yet. But the whisper of possibility. The morning after the piano incident, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about Eliana. She had woken early, as if the storm had instilled in her a sense of urgency, and was already at the window, watching the city below. Rain had long since given way to gray skies, but she seemed absorbed in something beyond sight. "Good morning," Jonathan said cautiously, stepping into the living room with a tray of toast and cocoa. She turned, a small smile breaking across her face. "Morning." He set the tray on the coffee table, watching as she carefully balanced the mug between her hands. For all her composure, she was still a child, yet there was a gravity to her presence that made Jonathan uneasy. "You have to eat," he said softly. "No skipping meals. That was what I was told when Claire was sick." The memory struck him unexpectedly, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the here and now. She nodded, taking small bites, her green eyes flicking to the photographs on the walls. She paused at one in particular, a portrait of Claire laughing beneath the cherry blossoms in Millennium Park. Her fingers hovered, but she didn't touch it. "She looks like me," Eliana whispered, almost to herself. Jonathan stiffened. The words were so quiet, yet so loaded. He swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. He shook his head, finding no words adequate. "She was someone very special to me." Eliana nodded, eyes downcast. "I think I understand." It wasn't understanding, not really. It was instinct, a recognition of loss, of echoes. And Jonathan realized the danger. The girl before him was unraveling the edges of his grief faster than he could control it. By midday, he had decided he needed answers. If Eliana had appeared out of nowhere, someone had to know something, an orphanage, a foster system, someone who had cared for her, however briefly. He pulled his phone from his pocket and made the first of several calls, careful to remain discreet. He started with a network of social workers, describing her, asking questions that skirted the truth but were direct enough to lead somewhere. The response was always the same: no records, no matches, a child unregistered, or a child who had vanished from the system before paperwork was complete. Jonathan frowned. The city was large, bureaucracy slow, but a child didn't just disappear. And yet, here she was, in his apartment, safe only because he hadn't called anyone yet. He placed the phone down, exhausted. The rational mind screamed at him to do the right thing, to find her legal guardians, to call someone who could protect her. But another part, one he had kept buried since Claire died, clung to the possibility that this girl was meant to be here, that fate had delivered her for a reason he didn't yet understand. Eliana had moved from the window to the couch, notebook in hand. She drew quietly, humming under her breath. Jonathan noticed the drawings were not random doodles, they were detailed, scenes from a life she could not have lived with him, parks he had never taken her to, streets she had wandered, a bridge across the river he had never crossed with Claire. He approached cautiously, crouching beside her. "These are remarkable," he said. She glanced up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I draw what I see in my head." "And what you see, you remember?" His voice carried both hope and fear. She nodded. "Sometimes. Not always." Jonathan's chest tightened. He recognized the patterns, the scenes, the way a child's mind records the world in fragments and fills in the rest. But these fragments were impossible. They didn't exist in her life, unless someone had made them exist. "Do you remember living with anyone?" he asked gently. Her hand froze mid-sketch. "Not really," she admitted. "Just pieces. Faces, a voice, smells. Sometimes they come in dreams." Jonathan felt the weight of it press into him. Dreams. Memories. Echoes. Could it be? No, he wouldn't let his mind wander there yet. "I'm going to help you," he said softly. "We'll figure out where you came from. I promise." Her eyes flicked up to his, the tiniest glimmer of hope. "You'll help me?" "Yes." His voice was firm. "No one will take you from me until we know the truth." She smiled faintly, returning to her drawing. Jonathan watched, unsure if he was rescuing her, or if she was rescuing him. The evening stretched into night. Jonathan reviewed every piece of information he had gathered, cross-referencing social worker notes, orphanage logs, and missing children reports. Eliana had slipped through the cracks, invisible to the systems designed to protect her. It wasn't negligence, it was oversight, chance, and fate twisted into one impossible thread. He finally leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. His apartment, once a shrine to grief, now hummed with life. The faint smell of cocoa lingered, the soft scratches of pencil on paper echoed through the hall. She was alive. She was here. And Jonathan realized something he hadn't in years. He had hope again. Not complete certainty, not even happiness, but the possibility that life could still mean something, that the void could be filled. Eliana looked up from her drawing again. "Will you play something?" she asked quietly. Jonathan hesitated, heart pounding. The piano still stood in the corner, untouched since last night. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling. She nodded. "Anything. I want to hear it." For the first time in months, Jonathan let himself sit down. His hands found the keys. Notes trembled at first, uncertain, then gained confidence as he played a simple melody. Eliana listened, her small body swaying with the rhythm. When he finished, she whispered, "It's beautiful." He swallowed hard. "You know, it was your mother's favorite. She played this often." Her eyes widened. "Claire?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes. She loved music more than anything." The room fell silent, filled only with the hum of the city below. And yet, for the first time, it wasn't oppressive. It was full. Full of possibility, full of questions, full of life. Jonathan realized that he couldn't keep her at arm's length anymore. The day of distance was over. Tomorrow, he would probe deeper into her past. Tomorrow, he would risk the truth. Because Eliana wasn't just a child in need of protection. She was a living thread tied to a past he could never untangle alone. And somehow, he knew the day's discoveries were only the beginning. The next morning, Jonathan rose before dawn, the city still wrapped in mist. He brewed coffee in silence, the quiet a stark contrast to the storm that had brought Eliana to his doorstep. He had spent the night reviewing reports, making calls, and tracing every possible lead on her origin. Yet the harder he looked, the more tangled the mystery became. Eliana appeared in the kitchen shortly after, rubbing her eyes, hair a tangle of curls. "Morning," she mumbled. "Morning," Jonathan replied, forcing a smile. "Sleep well?" She nodded, climbing onto a stool at the counter. He set a plate of toast in front of her and poured a cup of milk. As she ate, Jonathan considered what he had learned overnight. No records of her previous guardians. No reports of a missing child that matched her description. Nothing that could explain how she ended up in his building, or why she seemed to know things no child should. He tried to push the questions aside. Instead, he focused on her. He watched her small hands grasp the toast, the way her eyes darted to the photographs on the walls. She lingered over each one, pausing at images of Claire, lingering on the moments frozen in film. Jonathan cleared his throat. Do you remember anything about your family? Any names, places, anything at all? She shook her head, frowning. Sometimes through dreams. Bits of houses, a woman's voice calling me, a man I think I love, but I don't know who he is. Jonathan's pulse quickened. The words mirrored his own memories of Claire. He felt a pull in his chest, equal parts fear and hope. Dreams can be tricky, he said carefully. They mix what we see, what we feel, and what we imagine. But maybe there's a reason you dream of them. Maybe they're echoes of something real. Her eyes met his, searching. Do you think it's possible? He hesitated. I think we'll find out. After breakfast, Jonathan returned to his investigation. He had exhausted local agencies, so he turned to broader resources, old records, school archives, orphanage reports. Hours blurred as he pieced together fragments of information. Meanwhile, Eliana wandered the apartment quietly. She examined the books on the shelves, the piano, the photographs, as though she had lived there before. She hummed softly while flipping through an old album of Claire's drawings, pausing when she came to a sketch of a girl holding flowers in a sunlit park. Her gaze lifted to Jonathan. This feels familiar, she said. Jonathan's stomach clenched. Familiar? She nodded. Like I've seen it before. Like I've been here. He swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at him to dismiss it. Every rational thought told him it was impossible. And yet, he couldn't. By late afternoon, the first solid clue emerged. A social worker from a small Chicago orphanage returned his call. She confirmed that a girl matching Eliana's description had been placed there under unusual circumstances. The paperwork was incomplete, the child registered under a temporary alias, and then she had disappeared without a trace. Jonathan listened carefully, scribbling notes. When did she disappear? About 2 weeks ago, the woman said. The record shows she left overnight, and no one knows where she went. She was quiet, thoughtful, unlike most kids. Very perceptive for her age. Jonathan hung up, heart racing. He realized the pieces were aligning too perfectly to ignore. She hadn't wandered blindly into his life. Someone, had set this in motion. Eliana, unaware of the phone call, had found herself at the piano again. She ran her fingers over the keys, hesitant, then struck a melody. This time, it wasn't Claire's piece. It was something new, yet tinged with familiarity, as though it had always existed somewhere in her mind. Jonathan approached silently. You play beautifully, he said. She glanced up, cheeks flushed. I don't know why it comes out. I just hear it. He hesitated, then sat beside her, letting his fingers hover over the keys. Show me. She played again, and Jonathan realized this melody was original, yet hauntingly like Claire's style. The accident of genetics? Or memory? He didn't know. All he knew was that the girl before him was extraordinary, and the depth of their connection was growing with every passing moment. That evening, Jonathan forced himself to step away from the apartment for a short walk. He needed to think, to breathe, to separate himself from the swirl of questions and emotions. Yet the streets were restless, alive with the memory of the storm, the smell of rain lingering on asphalt, and he could not shake the image of Eliana at the piano. When he returned, she was asleep in the guest room, her green eyes closed, hair splayed across the pillow. He lingered, watching her chest rise and fall with quiet certainty. Somehow, despite the mystery, she was at home. Somehow, she belonged. And Jonathan realized the truth, he could no longer think in terms of past and present separately. Her presence had rewritten the rules of his life. He couldn't unsee the possibility that fate, or something more, had placed her here intentionally. Tomorrow, he decided, he would pursue her past further. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. For now, he allowed himself one small comfort: the girl who had walked into his life so suddenly, so inexplicably, was safe. And in that safety, he felt the faint stirrings of hope, fragile but undeniable. The next morning, Jonathan awoke to the soft hum of the city outside his window. Sunlight filtered through the gray clouds, casting a muted glow across the penthouse. He found Eliana already awake, perched on the couch with her sketchbook open, pencils scattered around her like tiny soldiers. "Morning," she said, looking up with a shy smile. "Morning," he replied, setting a plate of scrambled eggs on the table. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, glancing out the window. "Dreams." Jonathan stiffened. He had suspected that her dreams were more than imagination, more than fragments of memory stitched together. They were echoes, shadows of a life she couldn't fully remember, a past she couldn't name. "What did you dream?" he asked gently. She hesitated, pencil hovering over paper. "A woman and a man. I think they're my parents. But I don't know their names. Just faces. And a park. I keep seeing a park." Jonathan's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "Do you remember anything else?" "Sometimes I hear a melody," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "Not the one I played yesterday, something older, softer. Like it wants me to remember." He nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces in his mind clicking together. The orphanage lead, the missing records, the dreams, the melodies, everything pointed to one undeniable truth: she wasn't just any child. She was connected to his past in a way he hadn't dared to imagine. After breakfast, Jonathan returned to his investigation. He traced every detail he could find about the Chicago orphanage. A name finally surfaced: Helena Ward, the social worker who had processed her temporary placement. Jonathan called her directly, careful to sound casual, professional, but pressing for details. "Yes, I remember her," Helena said after a pause. "Eliana, unusual child. She disappeared almost immediately after placement. There was something different about her. She seemed to know things she shouldn't, and yet she acted as if she had no family at all." Jonathan's pulse quickened. "Did anyone know where she went?" Helena's voice softened. "She left in the middle of the night. No note, no warning. We checked with all local agencies, police, and neighboring orphanages. Nothing. She was gone." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, gripping the edge of the desk. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've been very helpful." As he hung up, his mind raced. Gone in the night. No one knew where she went. But he did. He hadn't called anyone. He hadn't let her out of his sight. She had come to him. Purposefully. And somehow, he felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Eliana, meanwhile, had wandered to the piano once again. She ran her small fingers over the keys, tentative, hesitant, as if testing something invisible. Jonathan watched from the doorway, the unease in his chest growing. "Play," he said softly. She struck the keys, and the melody that emerged was unmistakable. A lullaby, tender and haunting, the same one he had hummed to Claire at night. The same one he hadn't sung aloud in months. "How do you know this?" Jonathan asked, his voice tight. Eliana's lips trembled. "I don't know. I hear it sometimes, in dreams. It comes to me. Like it wants me to remember." Jonathan's chest tightened. The room spun slightly, the boundaries between past and present collapsing. His hands shook as he reached toward the keys, aligning his fingers with hers. Together, they played the lullaby, each note vibrating with the weight of memory and longing. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He didn't know whether to cry for the child lost, for the child found, or for the impossible connection threading them together. After the music, Jonathan led her to the couch. He sat beside her, voice soft. "Eliana, I need to know everything you remember about your past, no matter how small." She hesitated, eyes wide. I don't know everything. Just pieces. Names, faces, songs, a park. Sometimes a woman singing softly. A man. I think he loved me. Jonathan's chest tightened so sharply he could hardly breathe. He swallowed hard. Eliana, I think you might be part of my past. Part of a life I lost. Her eyes widened. You, what? He shook his head, exhaling slowly. I don't know exactly yet. But everything about you, your dreams, the music, the way you move, it reminds me of someone I loved and lost. She reached for his hand, small fingers clutching his. Then, maybe I'm supposed to be here. Jonathan felt the fragile thread of hope snap taut between them. He wanted to believe it, desperately. But fear clawed at him. What if he was wrong? What if he was clinging to a ghost, to a reflection of someone he had lost? Yet when he looked at her, green eyes luminous and searching, he realized that he couldn't turn away. He had already opened the door. He had already let her in. And now, there was no going back. That night, Jonathan sat in his study, reviewing the orphanage files once more. He found discrepancies, notes left half-finished, a missing name. And then, tucked in the margins, a single phrase, twin sister. Mother disappeared. Jonathan froze. His mind raced. Twin sister. Mother disappeared. He recalled Claire's face, the lullaby, the melodies. Could it be possible that Eliana was connected to his past more intimately than he had imagined? He poured himself a glass of scotch, but didn't drink. Instead, he stared at the documents, the realization settling in, the answers he sought would not come easily. Every thread he pulled would reveal more questions, more pain, more truths he might not be ready for. And yet, he could no longer ignore it. Eliana, sleeping peacefully in the guest room, had already changed everything. She had woven herself into the fabric of his life, challenging grief, defying logic, and opening a door he thought had been locked forever. Jonathan understood then that the first revelation was only the beginning. The mysteries of her past would surface soon, and with them, the choices he would have to make, choices that could reshape both their lives. He stared at the darkened city skyline, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. Because whatever secrets awaited, he would face them. Together. The city was drenched in rain again, the kind that clung to the streets and filled the air with a metallic tang. Jonathan stood by the window, watching water race down the glass, thinking of Eliana asleep in the guest room. Her breathing was steady, but the faint crease between her brows and sleep-suggested dreams were still haunting her. He couldn't ignore the files any longer. The orphanage records hinted at a mother, a twin sister, and a disappearance that had never been explained. Each notation made his chest tighten. He had lost one daughter a year ago, yet the possibility of another, alive, waiting, was almost unbearable. The thought of Eliana, small and fragile, suddenly seemed weightier. He had to know. He had to be certain. Jonathan spent the morning calling distant contacts, old colleagues, anyone who might have had ties to the orphanage or to the child herself. Hours passed. Then a breakthrough. A nurse who had worked at the facility remembered seeing a young girl matching Eliana's description with another child who had been transferred elsewhere. You mean, she had a twin? Jonathan asked, heart hammering. Yes, the nurse replied. They were inseparable. But their mother, she disappeared under complicated circumstances. The girls were split up. One stayed, one was sent away. Jonathan closed his eyes. Twin. Mother disappeared. The pieces fell into place, too neatly to ignore. He thought of the lullaby, the dreams, the melodies Eliana hummed. She wasn't just a reflection of someone he had lost. She was the daughter he had never known, the living twin of the child he had mourned. When he returned to the apartment, Eliana was at the piano, practicing again, her small hands tentative over the keys. She glanced up and smiled shyly. I heard something today, Jonathan said, trying to keep his voice steady. Something important about your past. Eliana's smile faltered. What is it? He knelt beside her. You have a twin. And your mother, she disappeared years ago. You were separated from your sister. Eliana's eyes went wide, pupils dilating with a mix of fear and disbelief. A twin? A sister? Yes, Jonathan said softly. Everything I've learned points to that. You weren't abandoned randomly. You were part of a family that circumstances tore apart. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. So, I'm someone's daughter? Not just a lost girl? Jonathan felt his chest tighten. Yes. You're someone's child. And you're mine. The words hummed between them, weighty and fragile. Eliana pressed her hands to the keys again, fingers trembling. The melody she played was different now, longer, deeper, filled with emotion she didn't yet fully understand. Jonathan listened, tears threatening, as though the music itself was a bridge between past and present, grief and hope. Over the next few days, Jonathan continued the investigation with renewed intensity. He traced the mother, a woman named Madeline Harper, to a small town several states away. Records indicated she had lived in hiding for years, avoiding both authorities and relatives. The reasons were murky: fear, financial instability, the burden of raising twins alone. Jonathan hesitated. Should he reach out? Confront her? Or wait until he had more certainty? He didn't know. All he knew was that the girl in his apartment, the one who reminded him of Claire, was part of a family that had been stolen from her. And he would not let that happen again. Eliana, sensing the tension, approached him one afternoon while he reviewed the files. "What are you looking at?" she asked, curiosity mixed with concern. Jonathan held the papers up. "Your past. Trying to piece it together. Trying to make sense of who you are." Her brow furrowed. "Do I belong to someone else?" "You belong here," Jonathan said firmly. "With me. With us. But your past, it matters. We need to understand it. Not just for you, but for everyone involved." Eliana nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between them. She trusted him, even when the truth terrified her. That evening, Jonathan took a calculated risk. He called Madeline Harper directly, using careful words to explain the situation. "Madeline Harper," a cautious voice answered. "Yes," Jonathan said. "My name is Jonathan Reese. I believe you have a daughter, Eliana. She's with me. She's safe, but she deserves to know the truth about her family. I need to speak with you." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice trembling with emotion, Madeline whispered, "I've waited for this moment for years." The conversation that followed was delicate, tense, and filled with revelations. Madeline explained how she had been forced to give up Eliana after circumstances became unbearable. How she had feared for her children's safety, how she had tried and failed to reclaim them. How she had watched from a distance, helpless. Jonathan listened, absorbing each word, feeling both rage and sympathy. He realized that life had dealt all of them cruel hands, but now they had the opportunity to reclaim what had been lost. The following day, Jonathan brought the news to Eliana gently. "Your mother knows you're here. She wants to meet you when you're ready." Eliana's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I want to meet her, but I'm scared." "I know," Jonathan said, pulling her into a hug. "It's okay to be scared. But you're not alone anymore. We'll face it together." For the first time, Eliana allowed herself to imagine a family, one that included both the mother she had dreamed of and the sisters she hadn't known existed. Days turned into weeks. Jonathan coordinated a careful reunion. The meeting was tense at first, Madeline frail, emotional, unsure, Eliana cautious but resolute. And when they finally touched hands, the connection was immediate, raw, undeniable. Madeline wept, words choking in her throat. "I failed you. I'm so sorry." Eliana's green eyes met hers, steady now. "You didn't fail me. You did what you had to do. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Jonathan watched, heart swelling and breaking simultaneously. The two women embraced, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. The puzzle was not yet complete. There were still questions, still losses, but the foundation of a family, long fractured, was being rebuilt. That night, Eliana returned to Jonathan's apartment, exhausted but radiant. She sat on the couch, holding her sketchbook. "Do you think I can have a family now?" she asked softly. Jonathan knelt beside her. "You already do. We're your family. And now, you have a mother who loves you, too. And soon, you'll have your sister as well." Eliana smiled, a genuine, fearless smile. Then maybe the storm wasn't so bad after all. Jonathan laughed softly, brushing a stray curl from her face. Sometimes the storms bring what we need most. Not just rain, not just lightning, but something more. Hope. The apartment was quiet that night, but it felt alive. The walls no longer echoed with grief alone, they resonated with possibility. The melody of a lullaby lingered in the air, soft, tender, bridging past and future. Jonathan realized that life, for all its cruelty, could also surprise. It could bring lost children to doorsteps, offer second chances, and create families where only fragments had existed before. And as he watched Eliana drift to sleep, sketchbook open, dreams finally free from the weight of solitude, he knew one truth above all. No matter the storm, some bonds were unbreakable. Some second chances were meant to be grasped, however fragile they appeared. And Jonathan Reese, for the first time in years, felt the future opening before him, not dark, not uncertain, but full of life, love, and the unspoken promise of family restored. The week following Eliana's meeting with her mother, Madeline Harper, was both exhilarating and tense. The city seemed brighter somehow, as though it had sensed a shift in the lives of those who inhabited Jonathan's penthouse. But the calm was deceptive. For every smile and every moment of joy, there was a shadow of fear, a lingering question that refused to settle. Eliana spent her days exploring the apartment, her green eyes catching details she had never noticed: the polished wood of the piano, the framed photographs of Claire, Jonathan's late daughter, and the small, quiet corners filled with books, untouched for years. She moved with tentative confidence now, but Jonathan could see her pause frequently, as though expecting someone to vanish at any moment. "You seem worried," Jonathan observed one afternoon as she traced her fingers along the spines of the novels. Eliana glanced at him, her small brow furrowed. I don't know what to expect. What if my sister doesn't want to meet me? What if she hates me?" Jonathan crouched to her level, taking her hands in his. "You can't control her feelings. But you can control yours. And you're brave enough to try. That's what matters." She nodded slowly, a shiver of understanding passing through her. "Brave," she whispered. "I can try to be brave." Meanwhile, Jonathan was busy uncovering more about the twin sister. Her name was Clara Harper, and she had been raised in a different foster home across the state. Records were sparse, but photographs from the orphanage showed the two girls together, identical in their small faces, with wide eyes full of mischief and trust. Seeing those images, Jonathan felt a sharp pang of loss, years of separation, years of missed moments. Yet hope persisted. He contacted Clara's foster family and arranged for a meeting, careful to preserve the fragile balance between excitement and caution. He didn't want Eliana to be overwhelmed, nor did he want to frighten Clara. The day of the meeting arrived, clouded and gray, echoing the storms that had once marked Jonathan's life. He brought Eliana to the park where he had often walked alone, carrying memories of Claire, carrying grief he had tried to lock away. Now, Eliana clutched his hand, her small fingers trembling but firm. "Are you ready?" he asked. Eliana swallowed hard. "Yes. I think so." Jonathan nodded, then motioned toward a figure waiting beneath a large oak tree. A girl about Eliana's age, her hair a darker shade of brown but her features unmistakably familiar, stood nervously. Her eyes widened as they locked on Eliana, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. "Eliana," the girl whispered. "Eliana," she echoed, her voice trembling. They stood frozen, a mirror image of each other, separated only by inches and years of absence. Slowly, carefully, they stepped forward, tentative hands reaching for one another. When their fingers finally met, a jolt ran through both of them, as if the universe itself had decided that some bonds could not be broken. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I thought I'd never find you. Eliana's chest heaved. Me neither. Jonathan stood a few steps back, letting them connect, letting the years of loss dissolve into a moment of pure, raw reunion. He felt tears prick his own eyes, the weight of grief and hope intermingling until he could scarcely breathe. Over the next days, the sisters began to explore their bond cautiously. They shared stories, drawings, and memories of fragmented pasts. Eliana showed Clara the apartment, introducing her to the spaces that had become hers. They laughed at small things, the way the sunlight fell across the marble counters, the squeak of the piano pedals, and the apartment began to feel alive in a way it hadn't in years. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Clara had been raised with her own version of life, her own fears and mistrust. She was wary of Jonathan, unsure of the sudden shift in her world. "Why did it take so long for me to find you?" she asked one night, voice tight. "Why was I left behind?" Jonathan's chest ached at the question. He had no easy answers, only a fractured history of mistakes and missed opportunities. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "All I know is that we can move forward now. And I'll do everything I can to make sure you're safe, and loved, and never alone again." Clara nodded, but her eyes betrayed lingering doubt. Trust, she realized, would not be given freely, it would have to be earned. Madeline arrived a few days later, cautiously optimistic but still wary. The reunion with her daughters was tender, filled with apologies and tears. She explained her choices, her mistakes, the years she had spent in silence. The girls listened, each processing the revelations differently, but gradually, the walls of fear began to crumble. "Mom?" Eliana whispered one evening, perched on the couch beside her. "Do you regret giving me up?" Madeline shook her head, tears rolling down her face. "I did what I thought was best at the time. I was afraid, and I made mistakes. But never for a second did I stop loving you." Clara leaned in, holding her mother's hand. "I forgive you," she said softly. "But I needed to know, we belong together now." Jonathan watched, heart full yet fragile, as the family began to stitch itself back together. But he knew the road ahead would be challenging. Trust had to be rebuilt, old wounds had to heal, and the shadows of loss still lingered. One evening, the sisters sat on the balcony, looking over the city lights. Eliana leaned her head on Clara's shoulder. "Do you think we can really be a family?" Clara smiled softly, eyes reflecting the glow of streetlights. "I think we have to try. And I think we already are." Jonathan joined them, standing behind the railing, hand resting gently on Eliana's shoulder. "Family isn't just blood," he said. "It's the people who choose to stand by you, who face storms with you, who love you even when it's hard. And that's what we are. Together." The three of them stood in silence, the city sprawling beneath them like a tapestry of light and possibility. Jonathan realized that the storms of the past, loss, separation, grief, had led them here. Every painful choice, every absence, had been part of the path that brought this fragile, imperfect family together. But challenges remained. The adoption process for Eliana and Clara was complex, and legal hurdles threatened to delay the finalization of their bond. Social workers questioned Jonathan's readiness, probed for stability, and subtly reminded him of the shadows of his past grief. Each session left him emotionally drained, but he persevered. "You're not trying to replace your daughter, are you?" one social worker asked delicately. Jonathan shook his head. "No. I'm not replacing anyone. I'm building a family. A family that was broken, and now we have a chance to fix it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had lost and everything he had found. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. One afternoon, an ex-foster guardian, someone who had handled Clara's placement, visited unannounced. She questioned Jonathan's motives, insinuating that he might be exploiting the girl's past for personal gain. Jonathan's patience snapped. "Do you think I would risk my life, my reputation, my sanity for anything but them?" he demanded, voice shaking but resolute. "These girls are my family. Their past is theirs, but their future. I will protect it with everything I have. Do you understand me?" The guardian, taken aback by his intensity, had no reply. Jonathan turned to the girls, smiling softly. "Let's go home," he said. And for the first time, the penthouse felt truly like home, not just a space filled with echoes of grief, but a sanctuary of life, laughter, and love. That night, Jonathan watched the girls asleep in their shared room. Eliana curled up on the left, Clara on the right, their hands brushing unconsciously. The room was a tapestry of past memories and new beginnings. The lullaby still hummed softly in Jonathan's mind, the sketches on the walls reflected the girls' creativity, and the soft glow of the nightlight painted warmth across their faces. He realized that while the storm had brought them together, love had anchored them. And though challenges would continue, grief never fully disappears, past mistakes never fully erased, the family had taken root. They were real, tangible, and unstoppable. For Jonathan, the lesson was clear: second chances existed not in perfect conditions, but in moments of courage, vulnerability, and choice. He had opened the door once, and now he would open it 1,000 times more, for love, for trust, for family. And as the city slept beneath the quiet sky, Jonathan Reese allowed himself to hope, not for perfection, but for the kind of messy, enduring, beautiful love that finally healed the past and promised the future. The morning light crept gently through the tall windows of Jonathan's penthouse, casting warm streaks across the living room. It was quiet, so quiet that Jonathan felt the stillness pressing against his chest. But today was different. Today was not for silence. Today was for beginnings. Eliana and Clara moved about the apartment, their small feet patting over the polished floors. They carried breakfast trays, one for Jonathan and one for each of themselves, balancing the plates with care. Jonathan watched from the doorway, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You two are getting very good at this," he said, voice warm. Eliana grinned. "Practice makes perfect. We don't want to spill anything before our big day." Clara nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Big day," she repeated, as if savoring the words. Jonathan joined them at the table, sitting between the two girls. The breakfast spread was simple but satisfying: scrambled eggs, fresh toast, fruit. Each bite carried significance, not just sustenance, but a quiet symbol of normalcy, of family routines that had been absent for far too long. After breakfast, the trio prepared for the day's journey. Jonathan had scheduled a meeting with the social worker to finalize the adoption papers. Though weeks of preparation had preceded this day, the nerves were unavoidable. He glanced at the girls, both of whom had dressed carefully, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in their eyes. "Ready?" he asked, trying to mask the tightness in his chest. Eliana took Clara's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Ready," she said firmly. Jonathan nodded, his throat tight. He grabbed his coat, and together, they stepped into the crisp spring morning. The city was alive with motion, but Jonathan barely noticed. His focus was on the two girls walking beside him, their presence grounding him in ways he had never imagined possible. At the social worker's office, tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Papers were shuffled, questions repeated, and Jonathan answered each with honesty, patience, and unwavering resolve. "Are you sure this is what you want?" the social worker asked gently, peering over the desk. "It's a lifelong commitment, not just for one child, but for both. There will be challenges, adjustments, and difficult days." Jonathan met her gaze steadily. "I am sure. I have loved and lost, and I refuse to let these girls be separated again. They are mine, not in possession, but in heart. And I will give them everything I have to ensure they know they belong, no matter what." The social worker nodded, satisfied, her face softening. "Very well. Let's proceed." Minutes stretched into hours, but finally, the papers were signed. The room felt lighter, almost as if the weight of years of separation and loss had been lifted in a single, deliberate act. Jonathan looked at the girls, his chest swelling with emotion. "It's official," he said softly. "You're both my daughters. Forever." Eliana's eyes filled with tears. "Forever?" "Forever," Jonathan confirmed. Clara blinked rapidly, a small smile breaking through her nervousness. "We're really a family now," she whispered. Jonathan reached across the table, holding both their hands. "Yes. And nothing, not time, not distance, not fear, will ever change that." Returning to the penthouse, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The rooms that had once echoed with silence now hummed with life. The girls raced to their shared room, unpacking the few belongings they had brought with them and arranging new decorations. Their laughter echoed through the halls, a sound Jonathan realized he had been starving for over the past year. "I think this room needs more color," Eliana declared, holding up a drawing of a sun surrounded by flowers. Clara nodded eagerly. "And maybe a shelf for our books. And our art supplies." Jonathan watched from the doorway, heart swelling. This ordinary, chaotic, beautiful domesticity was more than he had dared hope for. It was a life worth protecting, worth building. That evening, Jonathan took the girls to the rooftop garden of the penthouse building. The skyline of the city stretched endlessly before them, lights twinkling like distant stars. He carried a bouquet of sunflowers, their bright yellow petals defiant against the darkening sky. He handed one to Eliana, who twirled it between her fingers. "What do these mean?" she asked, curiosity alight in her eyes. Jonathan smiled. "They mean loyalty. They mean resilience. They mean standing tall, no matter the storm. Just like you two." Clara held hers tightly, looking from Jonathan to Eliana. "Then we'll always have sunflowers," she said, voice steady. Jonathan knelt beside them, taking both girls' hands in his. "Yes. And we'll always have each other. Family isn't just about blood, it's about being there, every day, no matter what." The sisters smiled at each other, understanding in their eyes. For the first time, the past no longer dictated their future. They were free to create it together. In the following weeks, the new rhythm of life settled over the penthouse. Jonathan returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. His colleagues noticed the change, the warmth in his tone, the light in his eyes. He spoke less of deals and more of stories, of family moments, of small victories and joys. At home, the girls thrived. Eliana excelled at the piano, practicing daily, while Clara poured herself into art and writing. They supported each other, teased each other, and sometimes argued, proof of the bond forming between them. Jonathan reveled in the mundane miracles, making breakfast together, reading bedtime stories, folding laundry, and listening to the girls chatter about school and dreams. These small moments, he realized, were the true treasures of life. Madeline Harper remained a careful presence in their lives. She visited often, helping the girls settle into their new routines. At first, the encounters were tentative, filled with awkward apologies and unspoken tension. But gradually, trust blossomed. The girls grew comfortable in her presence, and she learned to navigate the delicate balance between being a mother and respecting the lives they were building with Jonathan. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Eliana spoke first. "Mom, can you tell us again how you found us?" Madeline smiled, a mixture of sadness and relief in her eyes. "I never stopped looking for you both. I wanted to protect you, even from me. But when I knew Jonathan had found you, I knew it was finally safe for us to be together." Clara nodded slowly. "We forgive you, Mom. And we love you. But Jonathan, he's our family too." Madeline reached across the table, holding Jonathan's hand gently. "He's more than that. He's the reason we're whole again." Jonathan's throat tightened, emotion nearly overwhelming him. "We're all in this together," he said quietly. The next milestone came when the girls began school as sisters. Walking hand in hand down the familiar streets, Jonathan marveled at their courage. Teachers and classmates noticed their resemblance, their shared laughter, and the quiet strength they exuded. Jonathan realized that family wasn't just being together at home, it was about navigating the world together, showing resilience and love in every interaction. One afternoon, as they returned home, Clara paused on the stoop, looking up at Jonathan. "Do you think we'll ever forget the past?" Jonathan knelt, taking both girls' faces in his hands. "No. But we don't need to forget. We learn from it. And we use it to make the present stronger, brighter, and full of love. That's what matters now." Eliana hugged him tightly. "I like the present," she whispered. "Especially with you." Jonathan's heart ached with joy. "So do I, Eliana. So do I." Spring settled fully over the city. The penthouse, once silent and somber, now vibrated with life. Piano notes floated across the halls, sketches of bright suns and flowers adorned every surface, and laughter became the soundtrack of their days. Jonathan, once a man consumed by grief, had found redemption not just in love, but in family. He often reflected on the stormy night that had begun it all, the night a girl knocked on his door, drenched, desperate, and unaware of the miracle she was about to set in motion. Bread had been the simple request, but what arrived was far more profound: second chances, new beginnings, and the reminder that life could still surprise, even after unimaginable loss. On the anniversary of that stormy night, Jonathan took Eliana and Clara to Central Park, to the small memorial where Claire, his first daughter, rested. Eliana knelt first, placing a bright sunflower she had picked along the path. "I think she saved my place," she whispered softly. Clara followed, gently laying her own flower beside it. "And now we're all here," she said. Jonathan knelt beside them, feeling a weight lift from his heart. "Yes. And we'll honor her by living fully, by loving, and by never taking a single day for granted." The girls intertwined hands, their faces illuminated by the golden sunlight. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt whole, not just healed, but transformed. Loss had carved deep wounds, but love, resilience, and courage had created a foundation stronger than he had ever imagined. That evening, back at the penthouse, the family sat together. Dinner was simple, filled with conversation, laughter, and the quiet joy of belonging. The piano hummed softly in the background, sketches adorned the walls, and the scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen, a symbol not of survival, but of home. Jonathan looked at the girls, his daughters, his second chances made real. "We'll face challenges," he said gently, "but together, we can overcome anything. Family isn't perfect. But it is ours. And it will always be." Eliana smiled, her eyes bright. "Always." Clara nodded, squeezing his hand. "Always." Jonathan leaned back, letting the moment settle around him like a warm embrace. The journey from grief to hope had been long, tumultuous, and full of uncertainty. But standing here, in the midst of laughter, love, and belonging, he realized something fundamental: the most extraordinary transformations often begin with the smallest acts of courage, a knock on the door, an invitation to trust, a willingness to love again. And as the city lights flickered outside, the apartment alive with the pulse of family, Jonathan Reese understood, finally and completely, that he had been given a second chance at life, love, and redemption.